Hello, and thank you for being here with Cowboy Heart Stories. In the harsh American frontier of 1872, there was a town where hearts could be colder than the mountain wind. And today, step into a story about a woman the whole town turned their backs on, yet she was the only one who stepped forward to save a fragile life. When mountain trapper Caleb Mercer rode into the dying Rowan trading post in 1857 Wyoming, everyone knew he'd come for a wife. Every woman for 50 miles had her eye on him, especially golden-haired Eliza Rowan, the beauty who'd never been refused anything. But when Caleb dismounted and his gaze swept the yard, it didn't stop on Eliza's perfect smile. It moved past her entirely and landed on her older sister Hannah, the heavy-set woman everyone pitied, the one they whispered about, the one they assumed would die unmarried and alone. What happened next shattered everything the frontier thought it knew about worth. If you want to see how a choice like this can change everything, stay until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The spring thaw of 1857 came late to the Wyoming Territory. Snow still clung to the high peaks like stubborn ghosts refusing to leave, and the rivers ran cold and angry with meltwater that could sweep a horse off its feet if you weren't careful. Down in the valley, where the old Rowan trading post squatted like a wounded animal, the ground had turned to thick mud that sucked at boots and wagon wheels with equal hunger. Margaret Rowan stood on the sagging porch of that trading post, her weathered hands gripping the railing as she stared down the rutted trail that passed for a road. Her face was tight with worry, the kind that came from too many sleepless nights counting debts she couldn't pay and supplies she couldn't afford to replace. 3 winters ago, her husband Thomas had frozen to death checking the trap lines during a blizzard that came out of nowhere. Since then, she'd been fighting a losing battle to keep the post alive. Behind her, through the cracked window, she could hear her daughters moving about. The contrast between them had never been sharper than it was now, with everything hanging in the balance. Eliza Rowan, just 22 years old, moved through the cramped trading post like she was gliding across a ballroom floor. Her golden hair caught every bit of light that filtered through the dirty windows, turning it into something that looked almost magical. Her blue eyes were the color of summer sky, bright and clear and full of confidence. Even in a simple calico dress, the best one she owned, carefully preserved for occasions just like this, she looked like she'd stepped out of one of those fancy magazines that occasionally made their way west. Men stumbled over their own tongues when Eliza smiled at them. Rough trappers who could face down a grizzly bear without flinching would suddenly discover they'd forgotten how to speak properly. She knew exactly what effect she had, and she'd learned early how to use it. On the frontier, where opportunities were scarce and life was brutal, beauty could be a currency more valuable than gold. "Mother," Eliza called from inside, her voice sweet as honey. "Should I wear the blue ribbon or the yellow one?" Margaret didn't turn around. "The blue one brings out your eyes." That's what I thought too. There was satisfaction in Eliza's voice, the sound of a woman who knew she was preparing for a victory. In the back of the trading post, in the cramped storage room that doubled as a kitchen, Hannah Rowan was elbow deep in a barrel of cornmeal. At 26, she was 4 years older than her sister, but the gap between them felt like a canyon wide enough to swallow the sky. Where Eliza was slender and graceful, Hannah was heavy-set, her body thick and solid from years of hard labor. Her plain brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, already coming loose because she'd been working since before dawn. Her dress was patched in 3 places. The fabric faded from countless washings, chosen for durability rather than appearance. Flour dusted her hands and forearms, and there was a smudge of soot on her cheek from tending the fire. But it was her size that defined her in everyone's eyes. She'd been a heavy child, and the years had only added to it. In a world that valued the lean toughness that came from hard living, Hannah's obesity marked her as different, as somehow wrong. She'd heard the whispers all her life, heard them from townspeople, from trappers, from the few women who passed through. Sometimes she heard them from her own mother, though Margaret tried to hide it. Too big. Won't find a husband. Shame, really, such a burden. Hannah had learned to make herself useful in every other way. She kept the books for the trading post, her neat handwriting filling ledger after ledger with careful calculations. She knew which herbs could break a fever and which could stop bleeding. She could smoke meat so it lasted through winter, Could mend clothes so the patches were almost invisible, could organize supplies so nothing went to waste. She managed the root cellar, rotating stock so nothing spoiled, preserving what she could against lean times. The trading post would have collapsed within months of Thomas Rowan's death without Hannah's constant work. She knew it. Margaret knew it. Even Eliza knew it, though she'd never say so out loud. But usefulness, Hannah had learned, was not the same as being valued. And it certainly wasn't the same as being chosen. "Hannah!" Margaret's voice cut through the morning air. "Where's that cornbread you promised?" "Almost ready, Mother." Hannah wiped her hands on her apron and turned to the Dutch oven sitting in the coals. The cornbread inside was golden brown, just perfect. She pulled it out carefully, setting it on the scarred wooden table. Eliza swept into the room, the blue ribbon tied in her hair, her dress freshly pressed. She glanced at the cornbread, then at Hannah. "You have flour on your face," Eliza said. There was no malice in her voice. She stated it as simple fact, the way you might point out that the sky was blue. Hannah wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand, probably just spreading the flour around more. "Thank you." Eliza examined her reflection in the small, warped mirror that hung by the door. "Do you think he'll like me?" "Everyone likes you," Hannah said quietly. "Yes, but will he choose me?" Eliza turned to face her sister fully. "This is important, Hannah. You understand that, don't you? If I can marry well, we might save this place. We might actually survive." Hannah nodded. She understood perfectly. She'd done the same calculations Margaret had done. The trading post was dying, debts were mounting, suppliers in Fort Bridger were starting to refuse them credit. Without a miracle, or a wealthy husband, they'd lose everything by next winter. And Hannah, no matter how hard she worked, no matter how many skills she mastered, could never be that miracle. Not with a body like hers. "I hope it works out," Hannah said, and she meant it. Despite everything, despite the way Eliza's beauty had cast her into permanent shadow, she loved her sister. The sound of hoofbeats froze them both. "He's here!" Margaret's voice rang with barely controlled excitement. Eliza took one last look in the mirror, pinched her cheeks to bring color to them, and straightened her shoulders. Then she walked toward the front of the trading post with the confidence of a woman who'd never been refused anything in her life. Hannah stayed in the kitchen. Nobody had called for her. Nobody expected her presence. She was needed in this background, where useful things belonged. But curiosity got the better of her. She moved quietly to the doorway where she could watch without being seen. Caleb Mercer sat astride a powerful buckskin horse, and even from a distance, Hannah could see why half the unmarried women in the territory had their hopes pinned on him. He was tall, taller than most men, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build that spoke of years surviving in conditions that killed weaker men. His face was weathered by wind and sun, all hard angles and shadows, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore buckskins, well-made and practical, with a knife at his belt and a rifle in the saddle scabbard. Everything about him suggested capability, competence, and a kind of quiet strength that needed no announcement. He dismounted in one smooth motion, removed his hat, and nodded to Margaret. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was deep and steady, with no wasted words. "Mr. Mercer." Margaret smiled, the expression tight with hope and desperation. "We're honored to have you. Please come sit. We've prepared supper." They'd set up a table under the old cottonwood tree, the only tree of any size near the trading post. The afternoon sun filtered through new leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the worn planks they'd dragged out to serve as a makeshift table. Eliza was already there, positioned perfectly so the light caught her hair. She smiled at Caleb, the smile that had never failed to work. "Mr. Mercer," she said softly, "it's such a pleasure. I've heard so many stories about your adventures in the mountains." Caleb sat down, his movements economical and precise. "Most adventures are just trouble you didn't see coming in time to avoid." Eliza laughed as if he'd made a wonderful joke. "Oh, I'm sure you're being modest. Life in the high country must be so exciting." "It's work," Caleb replied, his tone flat and factual. "Cold work, mostly. Hard work, lonely work." He reached for the cornbread, broke off a piece, and took a bite. His expression didn't change, but he took a second piece. "This is excellent," he said. Margaret beamed. "Eliza helped prepare—" "I made it." The voice came from behind them, quiet and unexpected. They all turned. Hannah stood at the edge of the clearing, having emerged from the trading post with a pitcher of water. She hadn't meant to speak. The words had just come out, some stubborn part of her refusing to let credit for her work go to someone else. Caleb's gaze shifted to her, really looked at her. Hannah felt her face flush hot. She was suddenly, painfully aware of how she must look. The faded dress, the flowers still probably smudged on her cheek, the apron stained from a day's work. And most of all, her size. Her heavy body that marked her as wrong in a world that valued lean, hard-working efficiency. But Caleb didn't look away. His eyes traveled over her face, taking in details she couldn't read. "It's very good," he said. "Best cornbread I've had in months." "Thank you." Hannah set the water pitcher down, then retreated quickly back toward the trading post, her heart hammering. The supper continued. Eliza talked, her voice bright and engaging. She asked questions about mountain life, about trapping, about the cabin she'd heard he owned up near the Hoback River. She laughed at the right moments and looked impressed when appropriate. Caleb answered her questions, but his responses were brief, almost terse. He didn't elaborate. He didn't lean into the conversation, and he kept glancing past Eliza toward the trading post. Margaret noticed. A small frown creased her forehead. Hannah, watching from the window, noticed too. Each time his gaze moved toward the building, her stomach tightened with something she couldn't name. Hope? Fear? Both felt dangerous. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Caleb suddenly stood. "Ma'am," he said to Margaret, "I appreciate the hospitality." "Of course, Mr. Mercer." Margaret rose quickly. "Will you, that is, would you like to visit again? Perhaps tomorrow?" Caleb's jaw worked for a moment, as if he was turning over words in his mind, examining them before letting them out. "Before I answer that," he said carefully, "I need to know something." "Anything," Margaret said, perhaps too eagerly. "The woman who made the cornbread, the one who brought the water, is she spoken for?" The world seemed to stop breathing. Eliza's smile froze on her face. Margaret blinked, confusion flooding her features. You mean Hannah? Is that her name?" Caleb's expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had sharpened. "Hannah?" "Yes, Hannah Rowan, my eldest daughter." "Is she promised to anyone?" "No, but—" Margaret stammered, trying to understand what was happening. "Mr. Mercer, surely you mean—" "I came here looking for a wife," Caleb said, his voice cutting through Margaret's confusion with the clean edge of simple truth. "I need someone steady, someone who knows work, someone who can survive hard times without breaking." He turned to look directly at the trading post, though Hannah was no longer visible in the window. "From what I've seen today," he continued, "Hannah is that person. If she's not promised to another, I'd like permission to court her." The silence that followed was so complete that Hannah could hear the cottonwood leaves rustling in the evening breeze. She stood frozen in the storage room, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was trying to beat its way out. This couldn't be happening. Men didn't choose women like her. Not when there was someone like Eliza available. Not ever. Eliza's face had gone from shock to something darker, something that twisted her beautiful features into something almost ugly. "You can't be serious." Caleb turned to her, his expression neutral but firm. "I'm very serious." "But she's—" Eliza gestured vaguely, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "She's what?" Caleb asked, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Eliza looked to her mother for support, but Margaret seemed too stunned to speak. "I don't understand," Margaret finally managed. "Mr. Mercer, Hannah is— she's not— Eliza is beautiful," Caleb finished for her. "Yes, I noticed. And in 5 years, when a hard winter hits and supplies run short and the real test comes, what good will beautiful do me?" He took a step toward the trading post. "I've lived in the mountains for 15 years, ma'am. I've seen pretty women turn bitter when life gets hard. I've seen delicate women break when the work gets tough. I don't want pretty. I want someone who already knows how to survive." Margaret's face worked through a dozen emotions at once. Surprise, disappointment, confusion, and something that might have been embarrassment for having so badly misjudged the situation. "If Hannah agrees," Caleb continued, "I'd like to speak with her, alone, if that's proper. If not, you can stay within earshot." Before Margaret could answer, Hannah stepped out of the trading post. Her legs felt weak, but she made them carry her across the muddy yard. She stopped a careful distance from Caleb, close enough to speak, far enough to run if this turned out to be some kind of cruel joke. "I'm here," she said quietly. Caleb studied her face. Really studied it, the way you'd study terrain you were planning to travel. He didn't look at her body with disgust or pity. He didn't look away in embarrassment. He just looked at her like she was a person worth examining. "You keep this place running," he said. It wasn't a question. "I do what needs doing," Hannah replied. "Your mother and sister, they depend on you." "Yes." "You're not the one they hoped I'd notice." Hannah felt the words like a knife, even though his tone held no judgment. "No. Why do you think I noticed you anyway?" She'd been asking herself that same question since the moment he'd asked about her. 100 possible answers ran through her mind, most of them dark and self-deprecating. Because you want a workhorse, not a wife. Because you need someone you won't be tempted by. Because you want someone grateful enough to accept anything. But she was tired of lying, even to herself. "I don't know," she said honestly. Caleb nodded, as if her honesty satisfied something in him. "I'll tell you then. I noticed you because while your sister was performing, you were working. While she was talking about how exciting mountain life must be, you were doing the kind of work that mountain life actually requires. And when that cornbread turned out perfect, I knew you'd done it 100 times before until you got it right." He took a step closer. Hannah's breath caught. "I don't need someone to admire," Caleb continued. "I need a partner. Someone who can work beside me, not behind me. Someone who knows their own worth and doesn't need me to tell them what it is." "I'm not what people consider desirable," Hannah said, the words scraping out of her throat. "People are fools," Caleb said bluntly. "I've spent too much time alone in the mountains to waste words on foolishness. You want to know what I consider desirable? Competence, reliability, the kind of strength that doesn't advertise itself." He held her gaze, unflinching. "So I'm asking plainly, Hannah Rowan. May I have permission to court you? And if you agree, know that I won't court you and your sister both. I'm not that kind of man. It'll be you, or it'll be no one." Behind them, Eliza made a sound like a wounded animal. She turned and fled into the trading post, the door slamming behind her. Margaret stood frozen, her carefully constructed plan disintegrating in front of her eyes. Hannah's whole world seemed to tilt on its axis. Everything she'd believed about herself, about her place in the world, about what she deserved. All of it was being challenged by this rough, direct man who seemed to see something in her that no one else had ever noticed. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me?" Caleb's expression softened just slightly, the hard edges of his face easing into something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Because when I look at you," he said quietly, "I see someone who survives. And survival, out where I live, is the only thing that matters." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she forced them back. She'd cried enough over the years, over cruel words and pitying glances, over the certainty that she'd never be chosen, never be wanted. She wouldn't cry now, not when something impossible was being offered to her. "I'll need to think about it," she said, though her heart was already screaming, "Yes." "That's fair," Caleb replied. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I'll be camped down by the creek tonight. You can give me your answer in the morning." He handed her the pouch. Their fingers brushed, and Hannah felt a shock run through her at the simple contact. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it when you're alone," he said. Then he turned to Margaret, tipped his hat. "Ma'am, thank you for the hospitality. I'll be back at first light for Hannah's answer." He mounted his horse in one fluid motion and rode down toward the creek where the cottonwoods grew thick and the water ran clear. Hannah stood in the muddy yard, the leather pouch clutched in her hand, her whole world spinning. Margaret approached slowly, her face tight with emotion she was struggling to contain. "Hannah, don't," Hannah said softly. "Please, Mother, not right now." She walked past Margaret, past the upset table under the cottonwood and into the trading post. Inside, Eliza was destroying her room. Hannah could hear things being thrown, could hear her sister's ragged breathing and choked sobs. She wanted to go to her, to comfort her, but she didn't trust herself to speak. How could she explain this to Eliza when she couldn't explain it to herself? Instead, she went to the tiny room she shared with her sister, or had shared, until tonight turned everything upside down. She sat on her narrow cot and opened the leather pouch with trembling fingers. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Hannah unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was rough, formed by hands more accustomed to skinning pelts than forming letters, but it was deliberate and clear. I have been alone for a long time. I thought I preferred it that way. But watching you work today, I realized that solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. If you agree to let me court you, know that I will be honest with you, always. I will respect you, always. And I will never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Caleb Mercer. Hannah read the note 3 times, then a 4th. Each time, the words seemed to settle deeper into her chest, filling spaces that had been hollow for so long she'd forgotten they existed. She pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in her entire life, someone had chosen her. Not settled for her, not accepted her out of obligation, chosen her. The tears came then, silent and overwhelming. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of years of tension finally breaking loose, of a door opening that she'd thought was sealed shut forever. Outside, the sun finished setting, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of purple and deep blue. Stars began to appear, bright and clear in the mountain air. Down by the creek, Caleb Mercer sat by his fire, staring into the flames and wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life or the best decision he'd ever made. In the trading post, Margaret sat at the scarred wooden table, her head in her hands, trying to recalculate a future that had just shifted beneath her feet like unstable ground. In her room, Eliza cried with the bitter fury of someone who'd just learned that being beautiful wasn't enough, that it had never been enough, and that the world didn't always work the way she'd been promised it would. And in the small room at the back, Hannah sat with Caleb's note pressed to her heart, facing a choice that terrified her. She could say no. She could refuse his courtship and go back to being invisible, to being useful but unvalued, to living out her days in the shadow of her sister's beauty. Or she could say yes. She could step into the unknown with a man who saw her, really saw her, and risk discovering that maybe, just maybe, she was worth more than she'd ever been allowed to believe. The night deepened. The trading post settled into uneasy silence, and Hannah Rowan, the woman everyone had overlooked, prepared to make the most important decision of her life. Hannah didn't sleep that night. She lay on her narrow cot, listening to Eliza's ragged breathing across the room, and turned Caleb's words over in her mind like stones she was examining for hidden flaws. I will never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. The promise felt too large, too impossible. Her whole life had been about trying to be less, taking up less space, making less noise, wanting less, expecting less. And now this stranger was offering her permission to simply exist as herself. The darkness pressed in around her, thick and heavy. Through the thin walls, she could hear her mother pacing in the main room of the trading post, the floorboards creaking with each anxious step. Margaret hadn't spoken to her since Caleb left, hadn't even looked at her directly, and Hannah knew exactly what that silence meant. She'd ruined everything. The careful plan, the last hope for saving the trading post, all of it shattered because a mountain man had made an incomprehensible choice. Across the room, Eliza finally spoke into the darkness. "Are you going to say yes?" Hannah's breath caught. She hadn't known her sister was still awake. "I don't know," Hannah whispered back. "Liar." Eliza's voice was raw, scraped clean of its usual honeyed sweetness. "You know exactly what you're going to say. You've already decided." Hannah sat up slowly, her eyes adjusting to the faint moonlight filtering through the window. She could just make out Eliza's silhouette on the other cot. "Eliza, don't," Eliza's voice cracked. "Don't try to comfort me. Don't try to explain it. Just don't." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that couldn't be said. "I never meant to take anything from you," Hannah finally managed. Eliza laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound. You didn't take it. He just didn't want it. Do you know how that feels? To have someone look right past you like you're nothing? The words hung in the air between them, sharp and painful. Hannah did know how it felt. She'd felt it every day of her life, watching men's eyes slide over her without seeing, watching them light up when they looked at Eliza instead. "I'm sorry," Hannah said, because she didn't know what else to say. "Are you?" Eliza's silhouette shifted as she sat up. "Are you really sorry, or are you just scared to be happy because you've never been chosen before?" The question cut deep because it was true. Hannah was terrified that this was a mistake, that Caleb would wake up and realize what everyone else had always known, that she wasn't worth choosing. Terrified that she'd say yes and discover she didn't know how to be wanted. "Both," Hannah admitted quietly. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its sharp edge, replaced by something raw and more honest. "I hate this," she said. "I hate that I'm jealous of you. I hate that he looked at me and saw nothing worth keeping. I hate that our whole lives I've been told I was special because I was pretty, and now pretty isn't enough." She drew a shaky breath. "But I don't hate you, Hannah. I should, but I don't." Hannah felt tears burning in her eyes. "I don't know what to do." "Yes, you do." Eliza lay back down, turning to face the wall. "You're going to say yes. You're going to take what you've been offered, even though it means I lose, and maybe that's how it should be. Maybe I've won enough already." The words settled between them like a fragile truce, not quite forgiveness, but something close enough for now. Hannah lay back down and clutched Caleb's note to her chest, listening to the night sounds, the wind in the cottonwood, the distant howl of a coyote, her mother's endless pacing, and somewhere beneath it all, the quiet thunder of her own heart, beating out a rhythm that sounded almost like hope. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, Hannah rose and dressed with careful deliberation. She chose her best dress, though it was still patched and faded. She brushed her hair and pinned it up neatly. She washed her face in the cold water from the basin and looked at herself in the small, warped mirror. The woman looking back at her was still heavy, still marked by years of hard work and harder judgments. But for the first time in as long as she could remember, Hannah didn't look away in shame. She met her own eyes and held the gaze. "I am enough," she whispered to her reflection. The words felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar and bold. "I am enough. Us." She walked out of the trading post into the cool morning air. Mist hung low over the ground, turning the world soft and dreamlike. Down by the creek, she could see smoke rising from Caleb's camp. Margaret was already outside, standing by the well with a bucket in her hands, though she wasn't drawing water. She was just standing there, staring at nothing. "Mother," Hannah said quietly. Margaret turned, and Hannah was shocked to see tears on her face. Her mother never cried. "I'm sorry," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Hannah." "For what?" "For everything." Margaret set the bucket down with shaking hands. "For counting on Eliza instead of you, for making you feel like you weren't valuable just as you are, for being so desperate to save this place that I stopped seeing my own daughter." Hannah felt her throat tighten. "You were trying to survive. We all were." "That's not an excuse." Margaret crossed the distance between them and took Hannah's hands. Her grip was strong, almost desperate. "When that man looked at you yesterday, really looked at you and saw what I should have been seeing all along, I realized how blind I've been, how cruel." "You were never cruel," Hannah protested. "Wasn't I?" Margaret's eyes searched Hannah's face. "Every time I pinned my hopes on Eliza's marriage prospects. Every time I calculated our survival based on her beauty instead of your competence. Every time I let you work yourself to exhaustion while praising your sister for doing nothing. That was cruelty, Hannah. Just because it was unintentional doesn't make it hurt less." Hannah had spent so many years pushing down her hurt, telling herself it didn't matter, that she didn't know how to let it surface now. The tears came anyway, hot and sudden. Margaret pulled her close, and Hannah let herself be held, let herself be small for just a moment, despite her size, despite everything. "What are you going to tell him?" Margaret asked softly. Hannah pulled back, wiping her eyes. I'm going to say yes. Are you sure? You don't have to do this just because... I'm not doing this because of anything except what I want, Hannah interrupted, and the strength in her own voice surprised her. For the first time in my life, someone is offering me a choice. I'm choosing to take it. Margaret nodded slowly. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She smiled at Hannah with pure, uncomplicated pride. Then go, she said. Go and claim what's yours. Hannah walked down to the creek with her heart in her throat. The morning sun was just starting to burn off the mist, painting everything in shades of gold and silver. Caleb's camp was neat and orderly, bedroll already packed, fire burning low, coffee pot sitting in the coals. He was crouched by the fire, but he stood when he heard her approach. He didn't smile, didn't rush toward her. He just waited, patient and still, giving her space to come to him. I read your note, Hannah said when she was close enough to speak without shouting. And I have questions. Caleb gestured to a log he'd apparently pulled over to serve as a seat. Ask them. Hannah sat down carefully. Caleb poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her before sitting on a rock across the fire. The simple domesticity of it, sharing coffee, talking in the morning light, made something ache in Hannah's chest. Why did you really choose me? She asked. And don't just tell me about competence and reliability. Tell me the truth. Caleb took a long drink of his coffee, his eyes fixed on the fire. When he spoke, his voice was measured and careful. 3 years ago, I took a woman with me up to my cabin. A widow from Fort Bridger. Pretty woman. Refined. She lasted 2 weeks before she started crying every night, begging to go back to town. Said the silence was driving her mad. Said the work was beneath her. Said I was cruel for expecting her to live like an animal. He looked up at Hannah. I learned something that winter. Beauty is easy to admire when life is comfortable. But when the storms come, when the food runs low, when you're snowed in for weeks with nothing but each other and the work that keeps you alive, that's when you learn what a person is really made of. He set his cup down. Yesterday, while your sister was performing, I watched you. You didn't know anyone was paying attention, so you just worked. You worked like it mattered, like you cared about doing it right, not because anyone would praise you, but because that's who you are. And I thought, there's a woman who knows how to survive. That's all I am to you? Hannah asked, hating the vulnerability in her voice. Someone who can survive? No. Caleb's voice was firm. That's where it started, but that's not all I saw. He stood and walked to his saddlebag, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Hannah. What is this? She asked. Open it. Hannah unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a carving, rough but recognizable. A woman bent over a washboard, her back strong and straight, her face turned towards something unseen. It was clearly unfinished, but there was something powerful in the simple lines of it. I started this last winter, Caleb said quietly. I didn't know who she was yet. I just knew I was tired of being alone, tired of living with only my own company. I carved what I wanted, someone strong, someone real. Someone who knew hard work and didn't run from it. He looked at Hannah directly. When I saw you yesterday, it felt like I'd been carving your portrait all along without knowing it. Hannah's hands trembled as she held the small figure. No one had ever made anything for her before. No one had ever seen her as worthy of art, of time, of careful attention. I don't know how to be courted, she whispered. I don't know how to be wanted. Good, Caleb said, because I don't know how to court anyone. We'll figure it out together. He sat down beside her on the log, close but not touching. I'm going to be honest with you, Hannah, because that's the only way I know how to be. I can't promise you comfort. My cabin is small and rough. Winters are brutal, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. Sometimes I have to leave for days to check trap lines, and you'll be alone. The work is hard and constant. There are dangers, animals, weather, isolation. You're not making a very good case for yourself, Hannah said, and was surprised to hear the hint of humor in her own voice. Caleb's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. No, I suppose I'm not. But you deserve to know what you'd be choosing. What else? Hannah asked. I'm not romantic. I don't know how to say sweet things or write poetry. I'm rough around the edges and set in my ways. I've been alone a long time and I don't always know how to share space with another person. And the good parts? Hannah asked softly. Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. I keep my word, he said finally. Always. If I say I'll do something, it gets done. I won't lie to you, even when the truth is hard. I respect strength and I see yours. I won't ask you to be less than you are to make me feel bigger. He turned to look at her fully. And I think, given time, I could care for you deeply. Maybe even love you, though I don't know much about that. But I know I want to try. Hannah felt like her chest was too small to contain everything she was feeling. Fear and hope and longing all tangled together until she couldn't tell them apart. I'm saying yes, she said, the words coming out in a rush. I'm saying yes to your courtship. Yes to getting to know you. Yes to the possibility of all of it. Caleb's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if he'd been holding tension she hadn't noticed until it released. There's something else you should know, he said. What? I don't court halfway. If we do this, we do it with the intention of marriage if we suit each other. I'm too old and too practical for games. So if you have doubts, speak them now. Hannah thought about all the reasons she should be cautious. She barely knew this man. He was offering her a hard life in an isolated place. She'd be leaving her mother and sister, leaving the only home she'd ever known. But she also thought about the alternative, staying at the dying trading post, watching it crumble while she worked herself to exhaustion, growing old in Eliza's shadow, never being chosen, never being seen. I have doubts, she said honestly. I'm terrified, but I'm more terrified of never trying. Caleb nodded slowly. That's fair. Fear is honest. We can work with honest. He stood and offered her his hand. Hannah took it, letting him help her to her feet. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of a man who worked for everything he had. I'll come to the trading post every few days, he said. We'll talk, get to know each other. When you're ready, when we're both ready, we'll make the decision about marriage. No rushing, no pressure. We do this right. All right, Hannah agreed. They stood there for a moment, still holding hands, the creek rushing past them and the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. Hannah felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to step off into the unknown. Caleb seemed to sense her fear. He squeezed her hand gently. You won't fall, he said quietly. I won't let you. Those simple words, spoken with absolute certainty, did more to ease Hannah's fear than any flowery promise could have. They walked back to the trading post together, not touching, but walking close enough that their shadows overlapped on the ground. Margaret was waiting by the well, and when she saw them approaching side by side, relief flooded her face. Mr. Mercer, she said, will you stay for breakfast? Thank you, ma'am, but I need to get back to my camp. I'll return in 3 days, if that suits everyone. It suits, Hannah said, before her mother could answer. Caleb looked at her, and something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. He liked that she'd spoken for herself. He mounted his horse, touched his hat in farewell, and rode out of the clearing. Hannah watched until he disappeared into the trees, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in her world. Over the next 2 weeks, Caleb came to the trading post 4 times. Each visit was different from anything Hannah had imagined a courtship would be. He didn't bring flowers or write sonnets. Instead, he brought practical gifts. A good skinning knife with Hannah's initials burned into the leather handle, a warm shawl made from wolf fur, a bag of coffee beans that Margaret's eyes lit up at seeing. He didn't sit with her in the parlor making awkward conversation. Instead, he worked alongside her, helping her smoke meat while they talked about everything and nothing. He fixed the worst of the roof leaks while she organized the supply shelves below, and they shouted conversation up and down through the holes. During his 3rd visit, he brought his account books from his trapping business and spread them out on the trading post table. I need help with these, he admitted. Numbers aren't my strength. Hannah sat down and examined the messy ledgers, full of scratched-out entries and unclear calculations. Within an hour, she'd reorganized everything, creating a system that made sense. You're charging too little for your prime pelts, she told him, and you're not tracking your supplies well enough. You're probably losing money without realizing it. Caleb stared at the reorganized books with something like wonder. How did you learn this? My father taught me before he died. He said a woman who could manage accounts would never starve, even if she never married. Hannah's voice went quiet. I don't think he meant it as a comfort, but it became one. He was right, Caleb said. About the accounts, I mean. Though he was wrong about the rest. What rest? About it being instead of marriage. You can be good with numbers and still deserve to be chosen. The casual way he said it, like it was simple fact rather than revolutionary idea, made Hannah's throat tight. On his fourth visit, Caleb asked her to walk with him. They went down to the creek, following it upstream to where it pooled in a quiet eddy surrounded by willows. I want to show you something, he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. It's a map of the route from here to my cabin. He spread it out on a flat rock, and Hannah studied it carefully. The cabin was marked in the mountains, a good day's hard ride from the trading post. It's isolated, she said. Yes. The nearest neighbor? 10 miles, a Shoshone family, good people. Morning Star, the woman, she knows medicine. She might be willing to teach you more about plants if you're interested. Hannah traced the route with her finger. What happens if you get hurt out there? Or if I do? We help each other, Caleb said simply. Or we ride for help if it's bad enough. It's not perfect, Hannah. It's not safe. But it's real. He rolled up the map. I need you to understand what you'd be choosing. It's not the trading post with people passing through. It's not town life. It's just me, the mountains, and whatever we build together. Hannah looked at the creek, watching the water slide over smooth stones. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you want children? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. I never thought I'd have them, but if they came, I'd welcome them. You? I always assumed I wouldn't, Hannah admitted, that no one would want that with me. But yes, if it happened, I'd want them. Then we agree on that too, Caleb said. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the creek and the wind in the willows. Hannah realized this was what Caleb had been doing these past weeks, not courting her with romance, but building trust with honesty, showing her his life piece by piece, letting her decide if she could fit into it. I have something to tell you, Hannah said suddenly. Caleb turned to her, waiting. My sister Eliza. She's struggling with this. With us. I know. You know. I have eyes, Caleb said. She looks at me like I stole something from her. Did you? Hannah asked, then immediately regretted it. But Caleb didn't look offended. He considered the question seriously. No, he said finally. You can't steal what was never offered. She expected me to want her, but I never did. That's not theft. That's just disappointment. She's angry at me. She'll have to make peace with that herself, Caleb said. You didn't do anything wrong by accepting my courtship. I know, but it still hurts to watch. Caleb reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Hannah's ear. It was the first truly tender gesture he'd made, and it caught Hannah completely off guard. You have a kind heart, he said. That's good, but don't let kindness make you small. Don't apologize for being chosen. His hand lingered for just a moment before he pulled back. As they walked back to the trading post, Hannah felt something settling in her chest. Not certainty. She wasn't sure she'd ever feel completely certain about anything this big, but something close to it, something like rightness. That evening, after Caleb had gone back to his camp, Eliza finally spoke to Hannah directly for the first time since the night Caleb had first arrived. They were in the storage room and Hannah was checking supplies while Eliza pretended to help. Are you going to marry him? Eliza asked abruptly. Hannah stopped counting sacks of flour. I think so. Eventually. If we both decide we suit each other. Do you love him? I don't know yet, but I think I could. Eliza was quiet, organizing and reorganizing the same 3 jars on a shelf. I'm trying not to hate you for this, she said finally. I know. It's hard. I know that too. Eliza turned to face her sister fully. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. I spent my whole life being told I was special because of how I looked. And then one person, one man, decided that didn't matter. And suddenly, I'm nothing. You're not nothing, Hannah said firmly. Then what am I? Eliza's voice cracked. If I'm not the beautiful one, if that's not enough, what do I have? Hannah set down her ledger and crossed to her sister. She took Eliza's hands in hers. You have a sharp mind when you choose to use it. You have charm that could make stones smile. You have determination and spirit. You have value beyond what any man sees in you. You sound like him, Eliza said. Maybe he's right, Hannah replied. Eliza pulled her hands back, but not unkindly. I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not performing, to stop comparing myself to you, to stop measuring my worth by who wants me. Take all the time you need, Hannah said softly. I won't be happy for you, Eliza warned. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. I don't need you to be happy for me. I just need you not to hate me. I don't hate you, Eliza said, and it sounded almost like the truth. I hate that you're getting something I wanted, but that's my problem, not yours. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was progress. Hannah would take it. When Caleb came again 5 days later, he brought news. There's a preacher coming through, he said without preamble. He'll be at Fort Bridger in 2 weeks, then moving on. Won't be another one through here for months. He looked at Hannah directly. I know it's fast. I know we plan to take more time, but if you're sure, if you know you want this, we could marry then. Or we can wait. The choice is yours. Hannah felt her heart hammering. 2 weeks. It was terrifyingly soon, but she also knew that more time wouldn't make her more certain. She either trusted this or she didn't. She either believed that Caleb saw her truly or she didn't. She thought about his steady presence, his honest words, the way he'd shown her his life piece by piece and let her choose. She thought about the small carving he'd made, about the practical gifts that showed he'd been listening, about the way he looked at her like she mattered. I'm sure, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. 2 weeks. Yes. Caleb's whole body seemed to relax as if he'd been holding his breath. You won't regret it, he said. Promise? I can't promise that, he said honestly, but I can promise I'll work every day to make sure you don't. It was the most romantic thing he could have said, because it was true. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and panic. Hannah threw herself into the work of getting ready, partly because there was much to do, and partly because staying busy kept her from thinking too hard about what she was about to do. Margaret seemed to have accepted the situation, though Hannah caught her mother looking at her sometimes with an expression that mixed pride and worry in equal measure. The trading post's future remained uncertain, but Margaret had started making inquiries about selling to a family from Fort Bridger who'd expressed interest. It wasn't the salvation she'd hoped for through Eliza's marriage, but it was something. Eliza kept her distance, moving through the trading post like a ghost. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't warm either. She existed in a strange limbo between acceptance and resentment, and Hannah gave her the space to work through it. Caleb came every other day, always with purpose. He brought Hannah to meet his horse, a steady buckskin mare named Cinder, and taught her the basics of riding. Hannah had ridden before, but never well, and her size made mounting difficult. Caleb fashioned a stepping block and showed her how to use it without making her feel helpless. You'll need to ride up to the cabin, he explained practically. The trail's too rough for a wagon most of the year. On one visit, he brought samples of the furs he trapped: beaver, marten, fox, wolf. He showed Hannah how to judge quality, how to spot damage, how to properly store pelts so they didn't spoil. You'll need to know this, he said. During trapping season, I'm out for days sometimes. You'll handle the pelts I bring back. Hannah ran her hands over the soft furs, learning the feel of them. Will I trap too? If you want to. It's hard work and it can be dangerous, but I won't stop you from learning. He paused, watching her face. Though I'll admit I'd rest easier knowing you were safe at the cabin. I'm stronger than I look, Hannah said quietly. I know you are. That's not what worries me. Caleb's jaw tightened. What worries me is that I'm starting to care what happens to you, and caring makes a man cautious. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Hannah felt her breath catch. Is that a bad thing? She asked. No, Caleb said slowly, but it's new. I haven't cared about anyone's safety besides my own in a long time. Takes some getting used to. 3 days before the wedding, old Nathaniel Webb rode into the trading post. He was a grizzled trapper in his 60s, weathered as an old boot and twice as tough. He'd known Caleb for years, and had apparently heard about the upcoming marriage through the gossip network that somehow connected even the most isolated mountain men. He found Hannah in the yard hanging laundry. "You're the woman marrying Caleb Mercer?" he asked without preamble. Hannah turned, clothespins in her mouth, and nodded. Nathaniel dismounted stiffly and studied her with the frankness of someone too old to bother with politeness. His eyes took in her size, her plain features, her work-roughened hands. "Huh," he said finally. Hannah took the clothespins from her mouth. "Can I help you with something, Mr. Webb?" "You know who I am?" "Everyone knows you, sir. You've been trading here since before my father died." Nathaniel grunted, seemingly satisfied. "I came to tell you something about Caleb Mercer." Hannah set down her laundry basket. "I'm listening." "He's a good man, honest, hardworking, keeps his word." Nathaniel paused, chewing on something, probably tobacco. "But he's been alone a long time, real alone. The kind of alone that changes a man." "I know," Hannah said. "Do you?" Nathaniel's eyes were sharp despite his age. "Do you know what it means to spend months with only yourself for company? To go weeks without speaking a word out loud? It makes a man strange. Makes him forget how to share space, how to compromise, how to be gentle." "Are you trying to warn me off?" Hannah asked directly. "No." Nathaniel shook his head. "I'm trying to prepare you. Caleb's choosing you is the smartest thing he's done in years, but that doesn't mean it'll be easy. He's set in his ways. He's not used to explaining himself or asking permission. He's been his own law for so long he might forget you're not just another mountain to navigate." Hannah absorbed this, recognizing the truth in it. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you should know what you're getting into, and because—" Nathaniel hesitated, something like fondness crossing his weathered face. "Because Caleb's like a son to me. I taught him to trap, taught him to survive. I want him to be happy, and I think you could make him that way. But you'll need to be strong, not just work strong. Strong in yourself." "I am," Hannah said, lifting her chin. Nathaniel smiled, showing gaps where teeth used to be. "Yeah, I believe you are. Caleb wouldn't have chosen you otherwise. He's got good instincts for what survives and what doesn't." He mounted his horse again, grunting with the effort. "One more thing," he said, looking down at her. "Don't let him forget your flesh and blood, not just a partner. Mountain men have a way of treating everything like a transaction. Make sure he remembers you've got a heart that needs tending." Then he rode off, leaving Hannah standing in the yard with wet laundry and a lot to think about. That evening, Hannah asked Caleb about it. They were sitting by the creek, their usual spot for serious conversations. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for the hard realities they were discussing. "Nathaniel Webb came to see me today," Hannah said. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders tensed. "What did he say?" "He warned me that you've been alone a long time, that you might not remember how to share a life with someone." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring at the rushing water. "He's right," he said finally. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you the same thing." "Tell me now," Hannah said. Caleb took a breath, gathering his thoughts with the same careful deliberation he brought to everything. "I've spent 15 years in the mountains, mostly alone. Sometimes I'd go months without seeing another person. When you're that isolated for that long, you develop habits. You don't compromise because there's no one to compromise with. You don't explain your decisions because there's no one who needs to understand them. You become hard, inflexible." He turned to look at her directly. "I want to be a good husband to you, Hannah, but I don't know how. I don't know how to be gentle when I've had to be hard for so long. I don't know how to ask instead of just doing. I don't know how to consider someone else's needs when I'm used to only considering my own." "So you're warning me," Hannah said. "I'm being honest with you, there's a difference." Hannah considered this. "Caleb, I'm not expecting you to be perfect. I'm not expecting romance or sweetness. I'm expecting partnership, like you said. But partnership means we both have to bend sometimes." "I know." "Do you?" Hannah pressed. "Because it sounds like you're telling me you won't change, and I need to accept that." Caleb's jaw tightened. For a moment, Hannah thought she'd pushed too far, that he might get angry or defensive. Instead, he surprised her. You're right, he said quietly. I am expecting you to do all the adapting. That's not fair. He stood and paced along the creek bank, his boots crunching on gravel. I've been thinking about this all wrong, he continued. I've been so focused on warning you about the hardships, the cabin, the isolation, the work, that I forgot the hardest part might be me. Hannah stood and walked to him. She was shorter than him by several inches, but she didn't let that stop her from looking him in the eye. Then here's what I need from you, she said, her voice steady. I need you to remember that I'm not equipment. I'm not a tool you picked up to make life easier. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings and needs. I know that. Knowing it and remembering it when things get hard are different things, Hannah said. I need you to talk to me even when it's difficult. I need you to explain your thinking even when you're used to just acting. And I need you to understand that I'll make mistakes too, and you'll have to be patient with me the way I'll be patient with you. Caleb looked at her with something like wonder. No one's ever talked to me like this. Like what? Like an equal. Like someone who expects to be heard. Get used to it, Hannah said. Because if we're doing this, we're doing it as partners, real partners. Not you leading and me following. For the first time since she'd met him, Caleb smiled, really smiled. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing someone younger and more vulnerable than the stern mountain man he usually presented. I can work with that, he said. The day before the wedding, Hannah stood in the small room she shared with Eliza, looking at the dress Margaret had altered for her. It had been her mother's wedding dress, let out at the seams to fit Hannah's larger frame. The fabric was old but clean, simple but dignified. Eliza sat on her cot, watching. It looks nice, she said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for days. Hannah turned, surprised. Thank you. Eliza stood and walked over, running her fingers over the fabric. Mother was thinner than both of us when she married Father. She's let it out twice now. Once for me, when she thought I might need it. She paused. Once for you, now that you actually do. Eliza, I'm not going to the wedding, Eliza interrupted. I can't. I'm not strong enough yet to watch you marry the man I thought would choose me. Hannah felt her throat tighten. I understand. Do you? Eliza's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Do you understand what it feels like to have everything you thought you knew about yourself proven wrong? Yes, Hannah said quietly. I've spent my whole life being told I wasn't good enough because of how I look, so yes, Eliza, I understand. Eliza flinched. I'm sorry. I never thought about it that way. I never thought about how my beauty made you feel. And I never thought about how much pressure it put on you, Hannah replied. To always be perfect, to always perform, to carry the whole family's hopes on your shoulders. They stood there, two sisters who'd lived side by side for years without really seeing each other, finally starting to understand. I don't hate you, Eliza said finally. I want to. It would be easier if I did, but I don't. I don't need you to be happy for me, Hannah said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just need you to know that I didn't take this from you. It was never yours to lose. Eliza nodded slowly. I know. That's what makes it so hard. She crossed to her cot and picked up a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She held it out to Hannah. What is this? Hannah asked. Open it. Hannah unwrapped the cloth to find a delicate handkerchief, edged in lace. It had been Eliza's most prized possession, won in a card game from a lady passing through from St. Louis. Something borrowed, Eliza said quietly. Isn't that what brides are supposed to have? Hannah felt tears burning in her eyes. Eliza, I can't take this. It's your favorite. I want you to have it. Eliza's voice was firm. I may not be able to watch you marry him, but I can give you this. Let me give you this much. Hannah clutched the handkerchief, overwhelmed. Thank you. Eliza nodded once, then turned away, her shoulders tight. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day. That night, Hannah lay awake for hours, listening to Eliza's quiet breathing across the room. Tomorrow she would marry a man she barely knew, leave the only home she'd ever had, and step into a life that terrified her. But she would also step into being chosen, being seen, being valued for who she was, not in spite of it. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold. Hannah woke before sunrise and dressed carefully in her mother's altered gown. Her hands shook as she pinned up her hair. Margaret came in as the sun was rising, carrying a tray with bread and tea. "You need to eat," she said. "I can't. My stomach's in knots." "Eat anyway. It's a long ride to Fort Bridger, and you'll need your strength." Hannah forced down some bread while Margaret watched. "I'm proud of you," Margaret said suddenly. Hannah looked up, surprised. "I know I haven't said it enough," Margaret continued. "I know I pinned too many hopes on Eliza and took you for granted. But watching you these past weeks, seeing you stand up for yourself, seeing you choose what you want instead of accepting what you're given, it's made me prouder than I've been in years." "Mother, let me finish." Margaret's voice was thick with emotion. "You're stronger than I ever was. When your father died, I gave up. I stopped fighting for anything except survival. But you're choosing to build something, to risk everything for the chance at something real. That takes courage I never had." She took Hannah's hands in hers. "Be happy, my girl. You deserve it." Hannah hugged her mother tightly, trying not to cry and ruin the little bit of color she'd pinched into her cheeks. When she stepped out of the trading post, Caleb was waiting. He wore clean buckskins and a new shirt, his hair trimmed and his jaw freshly shaved. He looked almost uncomfortable in the effort he'd made, but his eyes, when they landed on Hannah, were warm. "You look beautiful," he said. Hannah felt her face flush. "You don't have to say that." "I don't say things I don't mean," Caleb replied. "You look beautiful because you look happy. That's the best kind of beautiful there is." They rode to Fort Bridger together, with Margaret following on the wagon. The journey took most of the morning, and they arrived to find the small settlement bustling with activity. Word had spread that the preacher was here, and several couples had gathered to be married. The preacher was a thin man with kind eyes, and a voice that had preached to too many frontier congregations to be impressed by much of anything. He gathered the couples in the small log building that served as both church and meeting hall. Hannah and Caleb stood before him, surrounded by strangers and the few people who knew them. Nathaniel Webb had ridden in and stood at the back, grinning. A few trappers Caleb knew nodded their approval. Margaret sat in the front, her face composed but her eyes bright. The preacher began the ceremony with the standard words that had joined countless couples before them. But when he got to the vows, Caleb surprised everyone. "Wait," he said. The preacher paused. "Is there a problem?" "No, but I'd like to speak my own words, if that's allowed." The preacher looked uncertain but nodded. "Go ahead." Caleb turned to Hannah and took both her hands in his. His voice was low but steady, carrying through the silent room. "Hannah Rowan, I'm not good with pretty words or romantic speeches, but I want you to know what I'm promising you today." He took a breath. "I promise to be honest with you, even when the truth is hard. I promise to respect you and your judgment. I promise to work beside you, not above you. I promise to listen when you speak and consider your needs alongside my own." His grip on her hands tightened slightly. "I promise to protect you when I can, to support you when you struggle, and to celebrate you when you succeed. I promise to see you, really see you, every day for the rest of our lives. And I promise that I will learn how to love you, even if it takes me the rest of my life to figure it out." Hannah felt tears spilling down her cheeks. She hadn't prepared anything to say, hadn't known she'd need to, but the words came anyway. "Caleb Mercer," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I promise to be strong when you need strength and gentle when you need softness. I promise to work hard and never ask you to carry burdens I can carry myself. I promise to be patient when you forget I'm not made of mountain stone, and to remind you that I have a heart that needs tending." She smiled through her tears. "I promise to build a life with you, not just survive alongside you. And I promise that I will learn to trust that I'm worthy of being chosen, even when old fears tell me I'm not." The preacher, looking slightly overwhelmed, cleared his throat. "Well then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Caleb cupped Hannah's face gently, his callous thumbs wiping away her tears. Then he kissed her, soft and careful, like she was something precious. When they pulled apart, Hannah saw his eyes were bright too. "Hello, wife," he said quietly. "Hello, husband," she replied. The small crowd applauded, and Nathaniel let out a whoop that echoed through the building. Margaret was crying openly now, but smiling through her tears. After the ceremony, there was a simple celebration. Someone had brought whiskey, and bread and cheese appeared from various packs. Caleb stayed close to Hannah, his hand never far from hers, as if he needed the physical contact to confirm this was real. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, Caleb turned to Hannah. "We should go," he said. "We can make it halfway to the cabin before dark if we leave now." Hannah nodded. She hugged her mother goodbye, holding on longer than she meant to. "Write me when you can," Margaret whispered. "Let me know you're well." "I will," Hannah promised. They rode out of Fort Bridger as the evening light turned everything golden. Hannah rode Cinder, the buckskin mare that Caleb had been training her on, while Caleb rode his big gelding. Their supplies were packed on a mule that followed docilely behind. As the settlement disappeared behind them and the mountains rose ahead, Hannah felt something shift in her chest. Fear, yes, but also excitement. Also hope. Caleb rode beside her, close enough that their stirrups occasionally bumped. He didn't talk much, but every so often he'd glance over at her, checking to make sure she was all right. They made camp that night in a small clearing beside a stream. Caleb set up their bedrolls while Hannah started a fire and made coffee. The domestic routine of it felt strange and right all at once. As they sat by the fire eating a simple meal of hardtack and dried meat, Caleb spoke. "There's something I need to tell you." Hannah's stomach clenched. "What?" "About the cabin. About our sleeping arrangements." Hannah waited, her heart hammering. "I've only got the one bed," Caleb said carefully. "It's big enough for two, but if you'd rather I sleep on the floor until you're comfortable sharing it, I will. I won't pressure you. We can take this as slow as you need." Hannah felt a rush of affection for this hard man who was trying so awkwardly to be gentle. "We're married," she said quietly. "I don't expect you to sleep on the floor in your own cabin." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Hannah paused. "Though I'll admit I'm nervous." "So am I," Caleb admitted. "I've never shared my space with anyone before. Not like this." They were quiet for a moment, listening to the fire crack and the creek rush nearby. "We'll figure it out together," Hannah said, echoing the words he'd used weeks ago when this had all begun. Caleb reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Yeah," he said softly. "We will." They sat there until the fire burned low, two people who barely knew each other but had promised their lives to one another, learning the shape of their new reality one quiet moment at a time. When they finally banked the fire and settled into their separate bedrolls, Hannah lay awake staring at the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing gently. "Sleep," he said. "I've got watch." "You don't have to sleep, Hannah. I'll wake you if I need you." So Hannah closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, fell asleep knowing that someone was watching over her. Not because she was useful, not because she was obligated, but because she was chosen. They reached the cabin late the following afternoon. The trail had climbed steadily higher throughout the day, winding through pine forests so thick the sunlight barely penetrated, crossing streams that ran cold and clear from snowmelt, skirting meadows where elk grazed and watched their passage with wary eyes. Hannah's body ached from the long ride. Her thighs burned from gripping the saddle, her back protested every jolt, and her hands were raw despite the gloves Caleb had insisted she wear. But she didn't complain. She told him she was strong enough for this life, and she meant to prove it. When they finally emerged from the tree line into a small clearing, Hannah got her first look at what would be her home. The cabin was smaller than she'd expected, built from hand-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss. The roof was covered in split shingles, and a stone chimney rose from one end. A small porch ran across the front, and behind the cabin she could see a lean-to shelter for the horses and a storage shed. It sat in a meadow surrounded by towering pines, with a creek running along the western edge. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks still white with snow despite the spring thaw in the valleys. The isolation was absolute. Hannah could see no other sign of human habitation in any direction. Caleb dismounted and came to help her down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her with steady hands. "Easy," he said. "You rode well, better than I expected for someone not used to long days in the saddle." "I don't feel like I rode well," Hannah admitted, gritting her teeth against the pain. You stayed on the horse and kept pace. That's all that matters. He kept his hands on her waist until she was steady. The soreness will ease in a few days. Until then, I've got a salve that helps. He led her toward the cabin while their horses stood patiently, too tired to wander. Caleb opened the door and stepped back, letting Hannah enter first. The interior was dim after the bright afternoon sun, and it took Hannah's eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a single room, perhaps 15 feet square. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking crane and a Dutch oven sitting in the cold ashes. A rough-hewn table stood in the center with 2 chairs. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies, tools, and equipment. In the corner stood the bed Caleb had mentioned, larger than she'd expected, covered with furs and a wool blanket. Everything was neat and organized. Nothing was decorative. It was purely functional, the dwelling of a man who had lived alone and needed nothing beyond what helped him survive. Hannah walked slowly around the room, taking it all in. She ran her fingers over the table, noting the knife marks scarred into its surface. She examined the shelves with their careful inventory of supplies. She looked at the few personal items Caleb possessed: a whetstone, a hunting knife with an antler handle, a small carved figure of a bear. "It's not much," Caleb said from the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "It's honest," Hannah replied. "It's exactly what you said it would be." She turned to face him fully. "Where do you want me to put my things?" Something in Caleb's shoulders relaxed. "I cleared out the bottom 2 shelves for you, and there's space in the chest at the foot of the bed." He paused, looking uncertain in a way she hadn't seen before. "I know it's not what you're used to. It's rougher than the trading post, more isolated. If you need me to build you something, to make it more comfortable, you only have to say so." Hannah crossed to him and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palm. "Stop apologizing for what you are," she said quietly. "You told me what to expect. I chose it anyway." Caleb covered her hand with his own. "I want you to be happy here." "Then help me make it ours instead of just yours," Hannah said. "Show me how things work. Teach me your routines. Let me figure out where I fit." Over the next few hours, Caleb did exactly that. He showed her where he kept the water buckets, how to work the pump at the creek, where the root cellar was dug into the hillside behind the cabin. He demonstrated how to bank the fire properly, how to use the cooking crane, where he stored the different supplies. Hannah absorbed it all, asking questions, making mental notes. She reorganized some of the shelves in ways that made more sense to her, and Caleb watched without comment, seeming content to let her make these small changes. As the sun set, Hannah prepared their first meal in the cabin, simple venison stew with wild onions and dried beans. Caleb sat at the table, supposedly mending a leather strap, but she caught him watching her move around the small space. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just getting used to having someone else here." "Good used to it or bad used to it?" Caleb considered this. "Different? Not bad. Just different." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that felt natural rather than awkward. Outside, the mountain evening settled in with the songs of birds and the distant howl of wolves. After they'd cleaned up, an awkward tension crept into the cabin. It was full dark now, and the question of sleeping arrangements hung between them like something physical. Caleb cleared his throat. "I'm going to check on the horses, make sure they're settled." He left, and Hannah knew he was giving her space to prepare for bed without him watching. She changed quickly into her nightgown, braided her hair, and slipped under the furs. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, the furs soft and warm. When Caleb returned, he moved quietly, banking the fire and checking the door. Then he stood by the bed, looking down at her. "I can still sleep on the floor," he offered. "Get in the bed, Caleb," Hannah said, her voice steadier than she felt. He nodded and began to undress. Hannah looked away, giving him privacy, though she could hear the rustle of clothes being removed. The bed dipped as he climbed in, staying carefully to his side, leaving space between them. They lay there in the darkness, both stiff and aware of the other's presence. "Hannah?" Caleb's voice was quiet. "Yes?" "Thank you for giving this a chance. For giving me a chance." Hannah turned toward him, though she could barely see him in the darkness. "Thank you for choosing me," she replied. They fell asleep that way, separate but together, two people learning to share space and breath and the uncertain promise of a future. The first week at the cabin passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Hannah threw herself into learning the rhythms of mountain life with the same determination she'd brought to everything else in her life. She learned that Caleb woke before dawn, that his morning routine was sacred and quiet, that he liked his coffee strong enough to strip paint. She learned which chores he preferred to do himself and which he was willing to share. She learned to read his moods and the set of his shoulders and the tightness around his eyes. Caleb, for his part, learned that Hannah was an early riser too, that she hummed while she worked, that she had strong opinions about the organization of supplies and wasn't shy about implementing changes. He learned that her size didn't slow her down the way he'd worried it might, that she was stronger than she looked, and that she approached every task with methodical efficiency. But the learning wasn't all smooth. On the third day, Caleb left to check his trap lines without telling Hannah where he was going or when he'd be back. She woke to find him gone, the cabin empty and silent. Hours passed, then more hours. By afternoon, Hannah was fighting panic, imagining him hurt or lost or dead. When he finally returned at dusk, Hannah was standing on the porch, arms crossed, face tight with worry that had turned to anger. "Where were you?" she demanded. Caleb looked surprised by her tone. "Checking the trap lines." "For 11 hours? Without telling me where you were going?" He frowned, clearly not understanding her anger. "I always check the lines on Wednesdays. It takes all day." "I didn't know that." Hannah's voice rose. "I woke up and you were gone. No note, no word, nothing. For all I knew, you were lying in a ravine somewhere with a broken leg." Caleb's frown deepened. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I don't leave notes." "You weren't married for those 15 years, Hannah shot back. "Things are different now." They stared at each other, the first real conflict of their marriage crackling between them like lightning. Caleb opened his mouth, closed it again. He set down the pack he'd been carrying and rubbed his face with both hands. "You're right," he said finally. "I should have told you. I'm used to answering to no one but myself." "I'm not asking you to answer to me," Hannah said, her anger draining away as quickly as it had come. "I'm asking you to consider me, to remember that someone cares whether you come back." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. He crossed to her and took her hands in his. "I'm sorry," he said. "You were worried." "I was terrified," Hannah admitted. "And then I was angry at myself for being terrified. And then I was angry at you for making me feel that way." "I'll do better," Caleb promised. "I'll leave notes. I'll tell you where I'm going and when I expect to be back. It'll take time to remember, but I'll try." It was the first of many small conflicts as they learned to navigate their new reality. Caleb forgot to tell her when supplies were running low until they ran out completely. Hannah reorganized his tools and he spent 20 minutes looking for his favorite skinning knife. He wanted supper at sunset. She preferred to eat later. She talked while she worked. He preferred silence. But they worked through each conflict with the same honest directness they'd brought to their courtship. Neither kept score. Neither held grudges. They simply adjusted, adapted, and tried again. 2 weeks into their marriage, Hannah was grinding herbs in the small mortar and pestle she'd brought from the trading post when Caleb came in from chopping wood. "There's a Shoshone woman outside," he said. "Her name is Morning Star. I told you about her." Hannah looked up, startled. "Now?" "She heard I'd married. She's brought you a gift." Hannah quickly wiped her hands on her apron and followed Caleb outside. A woman sat on a beautiful painted horse, her age impossible to determine, though the silver in her black hair suggested she was perhaps 50. Her face was weathered but kind, her dark eyes sharp and observant. She dismounted with fluid grace and approached Hannah, holding out a bundle wrapped in soft deer hide. "Welcome, wife of Caleb," she said in English marked with a slight accent. "I am Morning Star." Hannah took the bundle carefully. "Thank you, I'm Hannah." "I know, Caleb spoke of you when he came to trade last month. He said you were interested in plant medicine." Hannah glanced at Caleb in surprise. He'd been talking about her even then, before they'd married. "I am," Hannah said. "Very much so." Morning Star smiled. "Then open your gift." Hannah unwrapped the deer hide to find several bundles of dried herbs she didn't recognize. along with a small notebook filled with careful drawings and notes in both Shoshone and English. "These are plants that grow in the high country," Morningstar explained. "Some for healing, some for cooking, some for ceremony. The book will teach you their uses." Hannah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "This is too much. I can't accept—" "You can, and you will," Morningstar said firmly. "We are neighbors now. 10 miles is nothing in the mountains. We help each other." She studied Hannah with those sharp eyes. "You are different from what I expected," she said. "How so?" "Caleb described you as strong and practical. This is true. But there is also softness in you, kindness. This is good. The mountains need both strength and kindness to survive them." Hannah didn't know what to say to that, so she simply bowed her head in gratitude. Morningstar stayed for tea, sitting at the rough table and talking with an easy familiarity that suggested she and Caleb were old friends. She told Hannah about the area, pointing out which meadows flooded in spring, which passes stayed clear longest, where the best berries grew. "If you need anything," Morningstar said as she prepared to leave, "you come to us. My husband, 2 elk, and our son are good hunters. We trade. We help. You are not alone here, even when it feels like you are." After she left, Hannah stood on the porch holding the precious notebook, feeling something warm and solid settle in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she'd been dreading the isolation until Morningstar had shown her it didn't have to be absolute. "You told her about me," Hannah said to Caleb, "before we were even married." Caleb shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I was nervous. She's known me a long time. I wanted her opinion." "What did she say?" "She said any woman who could run a trading post and still had kindness left in her heart was worth keeping." Hannah smiled. "I like her." "Good. You'll probably see a lot of her. She doesn't stand on ceremony. She'll just show up when she feels like it." As spring deepened into early summer, Hannah's body began to adjust to the constant physical demands of mountain life. The aches that had plagued her those first weeks faded. Her hands, already work-roughened, developed new calluses. Her legs grew stronger from climbing the steep slopes around the cabin, but more than her body, her heart was changing. The armor she'd built around herself over years of being overlooked and dismissed was slowly cracking. Caleb's steady presence, his constant consideration, his growing affection, all of it worked like water on stone, wearing away her defenses. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her breath catch. When they worked side by side, he found excuses to touch her, his hand on her shoulder, his fingers brushing hers as he handed her tools, his body close behind hers as he showed her how to skin a rabbit properly. At night, the space between them in the bed had gradually disappeared. They slept close now, sometimes waking to find themselves tangled together, neither sure who had moved first. One morning, Hannah woke to find Caleb already awake, propped on one elbow, looking down at her. "What?" she asked sleepily. "Just looking," he said quietly. "At what?" "At my wife." He reached out and traced the line of her jaw with gentle fingers. "At the woman who's made this cabin feel like a home instead of just a shelter." Hannah felt her heart hammering. "Caleb, I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words simple and direct. "I thought you should know." Hannah stared at him, hardly daring to breathe. "You don't have to say that." "I know I don't, but it's true, and I promised I'd always be honest with you." His hand cupped her cheek. "You don't have to say it back. I'm not expecting that. I just wanted you to know." Hannah felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I think I'm falling in love with you too. It scares me." "Why?" "Because I keep waiting for you to realize you made a mistake, that you chose wrong, that someone like me isn't worth—" Caleb kissed her, cutting off the words. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce. "Don't," he said. "Don't let old voices tell you who you are. I chose exactly right. I chose a woman who's strong and capable and kind. I chose a woman who doesn't break under pressure. I chose you, Hannah, and I'd choose you again every single day." Hannah pulled him close, burying her face in his chest. He held her tight, one hand stroking her hair, and they lay there as the morning sun filled the cabin with golden light. That afternoon, disaster struck with no warning. Hannah was gathering herbs near the creek when she heard Caleb shout her name. The sound was wrong. urgent and edged with panic. She dropped her basket and ran back to the cabin. Caleb was on the porch, gripping the railing, his face gray with pain. His right leg was bleeding heavily, the buckskin pants dark with blood. "What happened?" Hannah demanded, her mind already racing through possibilities. "Axe slipped," Caleb ground out between gritted teeth. "Caught my leg." Hannah didn't waste time with more questions. She helped him inside and into a chair, then grabbed clean cloths and her medical supplies. Her hands were steady as she cut away the blood-soaked buckskin and examined the wound. It was bad. The axe had opened a gash from mid-thigh to just above his knee, deep enough that she could see muscle. Blood welled steadily from the wound. "How bad?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. "Bad enough," Hannah said honestly. "I need to clean it and stitch it closed. It's going to hurt." "Do it." Hannah worked with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before, though never on a wound this serious. She cleaned it thoroughly with water she'd boiled and cooled, then whiskey that made Caleb hiss in pain. She threaded a needle with the finest thread she had and began stitching. Caleb gripped the edge of the table hard enough that his knuckles went white, but he didn't cry out. He watched her work with eyes that were bright with pain, but also something else: trust. It took her 30 careful stitches to close the wound. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking and Caleb's face was slick with sweat. She bandaged the leg carefully and helped him to the bed. "You need to stay off it," she said firmly. "No arguing. You could tear those stitches and start bleeding again." "Hannah," I said, "no arguing." Her voice was sharp with leftover fear. "You're staying in that bed until I say otherwise." Caleb looked at her, and despite the pain, a small smile crossed his face. "Yes, ma'am." For the next 5 days, Hannah ran everything. She tended Caleb's wound twice a day, checking for infection. She chopped wood, hauled water, hunted small game, maintained the cabin. She did it all while monitoring Caleb constantly, watching for fever or signs the wound was going bad. Caleb hated being helpless. He tried to get up twice, and both times Hannah firmly put him back in bed. "This is torture," he grumbled on the third day. "You'll live," Hannah replied, checking his stitches. "Stop complaining. I'm not used to being taken care of." "I know, but that's what marriage is. We take care of each other." On the fourth day, Caleb developed a fever. Hannah's stomach dropped when she felt the heat radiating from his skin. Infection. Despite all her care, infection had set in. She spent that night bathing him with cool water, forcing him to drink willow bark tea for the fever, changing his bandages every few hours. Morning Star appeared around midnight as if summoned by instinct, took one look at the situation, and began brewing medicines from her herbs. "The fever will break," she said calmly. "You did well with the stitching. The wound is trying to heal. His body just needs time to fight." Hannah nodded, too tired and worried to speak. Morning Star stayed through the night, the two women working in silent partnership. When dawn came, Caleb's fever broke. He opened his eyes, clear for the first time in hours, and found Hannah asleep in the chair beside the bed, her hand still holding his. Morning Star smiled. "Your wife is fierce. She did not rest until the fever broke." "I know," Caleb said quietly. "I'm starting to understand just how lucky I am." Hannah woke to find Caleb watching her, his eyes clear and focused. "The fever broke," she said, relief flooding through her. "Because of you," Caleb replied. He squeezed her hand. "You saved my life. You would have done the same for me." "In a heartbeat," he said. "But Hannah, I need you to understand something. Watching you these past days, seeing you handle everything without breaking, seeing how strong you are, it's made me realize that I didn't just choose well, I chose perfectly." Hannah felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was so scared when I saw all that blood, when the fever came, but you didn't fall apart. You did what needed doing." He pulled her close. "That's who you are. That's who you've always been. And I love you for it." "I love you too," Hannah whispered against his chest. "So much it terrifies me." They held each other while Morning Star quietly prepared breakfast, giving them privacy in their moment. Caleb's recovery was slow but steady. True to her word, Hannah kept him off the leg until she was satisfied it was healing properly. During that time, they talked more than they ever had. sharing stories and dreams and fears. Caleb told her about his childhood, about losing his parents to cholera, about heading west at 16 with nothing but determination and a desire to be somewhere wild. He told her about the loneliness of those early years, the way isolation could feel like both freedom and prison. Hannah told him about growing up in her sister's shadow, about the quiet pain of being invisible, about learning to find value in herself even when no one else seemed to see it. "I'm glad I found you," Caleb said one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I'm glad you saw me," Hannah replied. "How could I not?" Caleb asked. "You were the only real thing in that whole place." By the time July arrived, Caleb was fully healed and back to his regular work. The wound had left a scar, but he wore it without complaint. The cabin had settled into comfortable rhythms, with both of them moving through their days in easy partnership. One morning, Hannah woke feeling queasy. She attributed it to something she'd eaten and went about her day. But the nausea returned the next morning, and the next. It took her another week to realize what it meant. She stood in the cabin, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, her heart pounding. That evening, when Caleb came in from checking the horses, she was waiting for him. "I need to tell you something," she said. He heard the seriousness in her tone and set down his tools. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think so." Hannah took a breath. "I'm pregnant." Caleb froze. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face crumpled, and Hannah was shocked to see tears streaming down his cheeks. "Caleb," he crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We're going to have a baby." "You're happy?" Hannah asked, her own tears starting. "Happy doesn't cover it," Caleb said. He pulled back to look at her face, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Hannah, I never thought I'd have this. A wife, a family, a real home. And now—" His voice broke. He pressed his forehead to hers. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for giving me more than I ever dreamed of having." Hannah cupped his face in her hands. "We're building it together." "Yeah," Caleb said, smiling through his tears. "We are." They stood there in the small cabin as the light faded outside. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, holding tight to the future they were creating together. The pregnancy changed everything and nothing at all. Hannah still rose before dawn to tend the fire, still worked alongside Caleb with steady determination, still managed the endless tasks that kept them alive in the mountains. But now there was an awareness beneath it all, a consciousness of the life growing inside her that colored every moment with new significance. Caleb became impossibly protective. He tried to hide it at first, but Hannah noticed the way he watched her lift heavy pots, the way he reached for the water buckets before she could, the way his jaw tightened whenever she climbed the slope to the root cellar. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she told him one morning when he tried to take a basket of laundry from her hands. "I know that." "Do you? Because you're treating me like I might shatter if I work too hard." Caleb set the basket down and rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture Hannah had learned meant he was struggling to find the right words. "I'm scared," he admitted finally. "I've survived everything these mountains could throw at me. Storms, starvation, injuries, animal attacks. But this? A baby, you carrying our child? I don't know how to keep you safe from something happening inside your own body." Hannah's irritation melted. She crossed to him and took his face in her hands. "You can't keep me safe from everything, Caleb. That's not how this works. But you can trust me to know my own limits. You can trust me to ask for help when I need it. Can you promise me you will? Ask for help?" "I promise," Hannah said, "but you have to promise to stop hovering." "I'll try," Caleb said, though they both knew it was a promise he'd struggle to keep. As summer deepened into fall, Hannah's body changed in ways both wonderful and terrifying. Her stomach swelled, her breasts grew heavy and tender. She tired more easily, though she fought against it with stubborn determination. Morning sickness plagued her for weeks before finally easing as she moved into her 2nd trimester. Morning Star visited often, bringing herbs and advice born from raising 4 children of her own. She taught Hannah exercises to prepare her body for childbirth, showed her how to brew teas that would ease discomfort, explained what to expect in the months to come. "Your body knows what to do," Morningstar said during one visit. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Trust yourself." "What if something goes wrong?" Hannah asked, voicing the fear that kept her awake at night. "Then we deal with it," Morningstar said simply. "But worrying about what might happen won't prevent it. Save your strength for what is, not what might be." In October, a letter arrived via a trapper heading north. It was from Margaret, written in her careful script on paper that must have cost precious money the trading post couldn't spare. Hannah read it sitting on the porch while Caleb worked nearby, close enough to give her space but ready if she needed him. Her mother wrote about the trading post being sold to the family from Fort Bridger. The sale had covered the debts with a little left over. Margaret was moving to live with her sister in Missouri, a plan she'd apparently been making in secret for months. But it was the words about Eliza that made Hannah's breath catch. "Your sister has surprised us all. After you left, she took stock of her life and didn't like what she saw. She's apprenticed herself to a seamstress in town, learning a trade with her own hands. She says she's tired of being admired for what she looks like and wants to be valued for what she can do. She's different now, Hannah. Harder in some ways, but stronger. More real. She asked me to tell you something. She said to tell you she understands now. She said watching you choose yourself taught her she could choose herself too." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face. Caleb appeared beside her, concern etched into his features. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Hannah said, wiping her eyes. "Everything's right. My sister, she's finally finding herself." She handed him the letter and he read it carefully. "You miss them," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, but I don't regret leaving." Hannah placed her hand on her swollen belly. "This is where I'm supposed to be. This is my life now." "We could visit," Caleb said suddenly. "Next spring, after the baby comes. We could make the trip if you wanted." Hannah looked at him in surprise. "You'd do that? Travel all that way?" "For you? Yes." He knelt beside her chair and placed his hand over hers on her belly. "You gave up everything to come here with me. The least I can do is make sure you don't lose your family completely." Hannah leaned forward and kissed him, pouring into it all the love she felt for this rough man who kept surprising her with unexpected tenderness. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the high peaks in late November with snow that piled up fast and deep. Hannah was 7 months pregnant when the first major storm hit, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Caleb had gone to check his farthest trap line, a trip that should have taken him 2 days. He'd left on a clear morning with Hannah's worried protests following him down the trail. "I'll be back before the weather turns," he'd promised. "I can feel a storm coming, but I've got time." He'd been wrong. The storm rolled in that afternoon like a living thing, bringing wind that howled like wolves and snow so thick Hannah couldn't see the tree line from the cabin porch. By nightfall, the world had disappeared into a wall of white, and Caleb hadn't returned. Hannah tried to stay calm. Caleb knew these mountains. He'd survived worse storms. He'd find shelter and wait it out, then come home when it was safe. But as the first night turned into the second day and the storm showed no signs of stopping, fear began to gnaw at her. The baby was active, kicking and turning, as if sensing her anxiety. Her back ached constantly from the weight she carried. The cabin felt enormous and empty without Caleb's presence. On the second night, Hannah woke to wetness between her legs. For a terrifying moment, she thought her water had broken, but when she lit the lamp with shaking hands, she saw it was blood. Not a lot, but enough to scare her. She sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, trying to assess. The baby was still moving. The bleeding seemed to have stopped, but she was alone, 7 months pregnant, with her husband missing in a blizzard and the nearest help 10 miles away through snow that was already waist-deep. Hannah allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of pure terror. She sat there shaking, tears streaming down her face, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. Then she stood up, washed herself, changed into clean clothes, and got to work. She built up the fire until the cabin was warm. She boiled water and set it aside. She laid out clean cloths and the supplies Morningstar had left for the birth, even though it was too early, because being prepared gave her something to focus on besides her fear. She brewed willow bark tea for the pain in her back and drank it slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. All through that long night, she talked to the baby. "You stay put," she said, one hand on her belly. "Your father is coming home, and when he does, we're both going to be here waiting for him. You hear me? We're going to be fine." The storm finally broke on the third morning. Hannah stood on the porch in the weak sunlight, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The world was buried under 3 feet of fresh snow, pristine and beautiful and deadly. She saw him around noon, a dark figure moving slowly through the snow. Even from a distance, she could tell something was wrong with the way he was walking. Hannah grabbed her heaviest shawl and waded out into the snow, her pregnant belly making balance difficult. She met Caleb halfway to the cabin and nearly cried at the sight of him. His face was gray with cold and exhaustion. Ice crusted his beard and eyebrows. He was limping badly on his left leg, and when he tried to speak, his words were slurred. "Got turned around," he managed. "Took shelter in a cave. Legs frostbit." Hannah got her shoulder under his arm and helped him back to the cabin, her own fear forgotten in the immediate crisis. She got him inside and into a chair, then began the careful process of warming him up slowly, knowing that warming frostbite too quickly could cause more damage. She removed his boots with gentle hands and bit back a gasp at what she saw. His left foot was white and waxy, clearly frostbitten. His toes on that foot showed no movement when she touched them. "How bad?" Caleb asked through chattering teeth. "Bad enough," Hannah said honestly. "We need to warm it slowly. It's going to hurt." "Everything already hurts," Caleb said. Then his eyes focused on her face, really seeing her for the first time. "You've been crying. What's wrong?" "Nothing. You're home. That's all that matters." "Hannah." His voice was sharp despite his exhaustion. "What happened?" She told him about the bleeding, watching his face go even paler if that was possible. "The baby?" he asked hoarsely. "Still moving. The bleeding stopped. I think we're okay." She touched his face. "But you need to focus on yourself right now." Over the next 3 days, Hannah nursed Caleb back to health with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. The frostbite was serious but not catastrophic. He'd lose 2 toes on his left foot, but the rest would heal. The process was excruciating. Caleb, who'd barely made a sound when she'd stitched his leg months earlier, couldn't hold back cries of pain as feeling returned to the frozen tissue. Hannah sat with him through all of it, holding his hand, wiping the sweat from his face, talking him through the worst of it. "I thought I'd lost you," she said one night when the pain had finally eased enough for him to rest. "I thought I'd lost me too," Caleb admitted. "I got disoriented in the storm. Couldn't find my landmarks. By the time I realized how lost I was already hypothermic." He gripped her hand tightly. "I kept thinking about you here alone. About the baby. About everything I'd promised you. That's what kept me moving. The thought of you waiting for me." "I'll always wait for you," Hannah said. "But Caleb, you have to promise me you'll be more careful. You're not just responsible for yourself anymore." "I know. Believe me, I know." He placed his hand on her belly. "How are you really? Tell me the truth." Hannah hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option. "I'm scared. The bleeding scared me. Being alone scared me. The thought of something happening to you or the baby scared me. But you handled it anyway. What choice did I have?" Caleb pulled her close, mindful of her pregnant belly between them. "You always have a choice, Hannah. You could have fallen apart. You could have given up. But you didn't. You stayed strong. You took care of yourself and the baby. You survived." "We survived," Hannah corrected. "All 3 of us." The rest of the winter passed in careful caution. Caleb healed, adapting to the loss of his toes with characteristic stoicism. He built up their supplies, hunted close to the cabin, and never left without telling Hannah exactly where he'd be and when he'd return. Hannah's belly grew impossibly large. By February, she could barely see her own feet. Simple tasks like putting on her boots became exercises in creative problem-solving. She waddled more than walked, and her back ached constantly from carrying the extra weight. But she also felt strong. The pregnancy had proved something to her, that her body, the body she'd been taught to see as wrong and inadequate, was capable of creating life, of nurturing it, of being exactly what it needed to be. In early March, 2 weeks before Hannah's calculated due date, her water broke while she was kneading bread. She stood there for a moment, feeling the warm liquid soaking through her dress, processing what it meant. Then she turned to Caleb, who was sharpening his knife at the table. "It's time," she said calmly. Caleb dropped the knife. "Now? Are you sure?" "I'm standing in a puddle, Caleb, I'm sure." He was on his feet instantly, all the careful plans they'd made flying out of his head in the face of the actual moment. "What do I do? Should I get Morning Star? Should I—" "First, you need to breathe," Hannah said. "Then you need to ride to get Morning Star while I still have time between contractions." Caleb nodded, visibly pulling himself together. He helped Hannah to the bed, made sure she had water and clean cloths within reach, then rode out hard for the Shoshone camp. The first real contraction hit while he was gone. Hannah gripped the edge of the bed and breathed through it, remembering everything Morning Star had taught her. When it passed, she lay back and laughed at the absurdity of it all. Here she was, the woman no one had wanted, about to give birth to a child with a man who'd chosen her above all others. Caleb returned with Morning Star in less than an hour. The older woman took one look at Hannah and began organizing the cabin with practiced efficiency. "How far apart are the pains?" she asked. "Maybe 10 minutes, Hannah said. "Good. We have time." Morning Star placed a cool hand on Hannah's forehead. "This is going to be hard work, but you're strong. You can do this." Labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain that eclipsed anything Hannah had ever experienced. 14 hours of Caleb gripping her hand until her bones ached, whispering encouragements, wiping her face with cool cloths. 14 hours of Morning Star's calm presence, checking progress, offering herbs for the pain, reminding Hannah to breathe. When the baby finally came, sliding into Morning Star's waiting hands with a lusty cry that filled the cabin, Hannah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and exhilarated. "A daughter," Morning Star announced, placing the baby on Hannah's chest. "Strong lungs, all fingers and toes, perfect." Hannah looked down at the tiny red-faced creature on her chest, this new person she and Caleb had made, and felt her heart crack wide open with love so fierce it hurt. Caleb knelt beside the bed, his face wet with tears, one hand gently touching the baby's head. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's perfect. You're perfect." They named her Sarah, after the grandmother she'd never meet. Sarah had Hannah's brown hair and Caleb's gray eyes, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she owned both her parents completely. The first weeks with the newborn were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding. Hannah's body ached in new ways, and she struggled with the overwhelming responsibility of keeping this tiny person alive. But Caleb stepped in without being asked, changing diapers, walking the floor with Sarah when she cried at night, giving Hannah time to rest and heal. "I thought you didn't know how to do this," Hannah said one night, watching him rock Sarah with surprising competence. "I don't. I'm learning as I go, same as you." He looked down at his daughter's face. "But I figure if we both care this much, we'll figure it out." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it a letter from Margaret. She'd heard about the baby through the network of trappers and travelers, and her joy leaped off the page. But it was the postscript that made Hannah smile through tears. "Eliza sends her love. She's made her first dress entirely on her own and sold it for good money. She says to tell you she finally understands what you've known all along, that being valuable and being valued are not the same thing, and the first matters more than the second. She also says to tell the baby she has an aunt who can't wait to meet her." In May, when Sarah was 2 months old and the passes were finally clear, a visitor arrived at the cabin. Hannah was hanging laundry while Sarah slept in a basket in the shade when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up to see a woman riding toward the cabin, a woman with golden hair and familiar blue eyes, though something in her face had changed, had hardened and softened all at once. "Eliza?" Hannah breathed. Her sister dismounted and stood there for a long moment, just looking at Hannah. Then she crossed the distance between them and pulled Hannah into a fierce embrace. "I had to see you," Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. "I had to tell you I'm sorry for how I acted, for the things I said, for not being happy for you when you deserved happiness." Hannah hugged her sister tightly. "You're here now. That's what matters." They pulled apart, and Eliza looked past Hannah to the basket where Sarah was beginning to fuss. "Can I meet her?" Eliza asked. Hannah lifted Sarah from the basket and placed her in Eliza's arms. Her sister looked down at the baby with an expression Hannah had never seen on her face before, pure, uncomplicated love. "She's beautiful," Eliza whispered. "She looks like you." "She looks like both of us," Hannah corrected. "Like all of us." Caleb emerged from the cabin, stopping short when he saw Eliza. There was a moment of tension, of history and hurt hanging between them. Then Eliza spoke. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not choosing me, for showing me that beauty isn't enough, for teaching me without meaning to that I needed to become someone worth more than how I looked." Caleb nodded slowly. "You did that yourself. I just made a choice. You made yourself into someone new." Eliza stayed for 3 days. In that time, the sisters talked about everything, their childhood, their fears, their dreams, the paths their lives had taken. They laughed and cried and mended fences that had been broken longer than either of them had realized. On the morning Eliza prepared to leave, she held Sarah one last time. "I'm going to be the aunt who spoils her," she announced. "The one who makes her beautiful dresses and tells her stories about her brave parents who built a life in the mountains." "You're welcome anytime," Hannah said. "Your family. You'll always be welcome here." After Eliza rode away, Hannah stood on the porch with Sarah in her arms and Caleb's hand in hers, looking out at the mountains that had become her home. She thought about the woman she'd been, the overlooked sister, the one everyone dismissed, the one who'd believed she wasn't worthy of being chosen. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from a different life, because this was who she was now. A wife, a mother, a partner in a life built on honesty and hard work and love that had grown from careful tending. She was the woman who'd survived the wilderness, who'd saved her husband's life, who'd given birth in a mountain cabin with only determination and trust to see her through. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, his arm coming around her waist. "About how far I've come," Hannah said. "About how I used to believe my size made me worthless, and now I know it's just part of who I am, not the whole story, just one part." "The whole story is still being written," Caleb said. "We've got years left to fill in the pages." Sarah made a small sound, and they both looked down at her, this tiny person who was the best of both of them. Summer arrived in full, painting the meadow in wildflowers. Hannah worked in her garden while Sarah slept nearby, teaching herself new plants with Morningstar's guidance. Caleb built an addition onto the cabin, creating a separate room for Sarah and any siblings who might follow. In August, Nathaniel Webb wrote in with news that made Hannah's heart sing. The new owners of this trading post had hired Margaret to stay on and manage it. She wouldn't be moving to Missouri after all. She'd be close enough to visit, close enough to watch Sarah grow. "She sent you a message," Nathaniel said, handing Hannah a folded paper. "Said to tell you she's proud of you. Said you built something real when everyone expected you to settle for less." That night, as Hannah nursed Sarah in the rocking chair Caleb had made for her, she reflected on the truth of her mother's words. She had built something real, a marriage based on partnership and truth, a home that was rough but warm, a family that was small but complete. Caleb came in from his evening chores and found them there, mother and daughter in the lamplight. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching, his expression soft with contentment. "Come here," Hannah said quietly. He crossed to them and knelt beside the chair. Sarah had finished nursing and was drowsy, her tiny hand gripping Hannah's finger with surprising strength. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Hannah asked. "That first day at the trading post? You said I knew how to survive." "I remember." "You were wrong," Hannah said. She touched his face with her free hand. "I didn't just know how to survive, I knew how to live. I just needed someone to see it, to choose me and give me the space to become who I was always meant to be." Caleb covered her hand with his. "You gave me the same thing. I was surviving too, just getting by, day to day, year to year, but you taught me what it means to really live, to share life, not just endure it." Sarah yawned, a tiny sound that made them both smile. "She's going to grow up knowing she's loved," Hannah said, "knowing that she's valuable just as she is, knowing that she doesn't have to be the prettiest or the most admired to matter." "She'll learn that from you," Caleb said, "from watching you be exactly who you are without apology." They put Sarah to bed in her cradle, the one Caleb had carved with careful attention, smoothing every edge until it was perfect. Then they stood together at the cabin window, looking out at the stars scattered across the mountain sky. Hannah leaned back against Caleb's chest, feeling his arms come around her, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. Once upon a time, she'd been the sister no one wanted, the woman everyone overlooked, the one dismissed because her body didn't fit the narrow definition of acceptable. But Caleb had looked past all of that and seen what mattered: her strength, her competence, her worth. He'd chosen her when everyone expected him to choose her beautiful sister. He'd married her when the world said she should be grateful just to be considered. And in choosing her, he'd given her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to choose herself. To stop apologizing for taking up space. To stop believing the lies she'd been told about her value. She'd built a life here in these mountains, a real life, full of work and love and the kind of happiness that comes from being truly seen. She'd survived blizzards and isolation and the terrifying responsibility of bringing new life into a harsh world. She'd saved her husband's life and built a partnership that worked because they both showed up every day, ready to do the work. Real love, she'd learned, wasn't found in grand gestures or pretty words. It was found in the daily choice to show up, to try, to bend and grow and change together. It was found in a man who learned to leave notes when he went to check his trap lines, and a woman who learned to ask for help when she needed it. It was found in honest conversations and mutual respect and the willingness to see each other truly. Years later, when Sarah was old enough to ask questions, she'd want to know how her parents met. Hannah would tell her the truth, that her father had ridden into a dying trading post looking for a wife, and everyone had expected him to choose the beautiful sister. But he'd chosen the overlooked one instead, the one with the generous body and the capable hands, the one who knew how to work and survive and build something real. And Sarah would ask, as children do, why her father had made that choice when everyone expected something different. Hannah would tell her what Caleb had told her on that very first day, that beauty fades, but strength endures, that what survives matters more than what dazzles, that being truly seen is worth more than being widely admired. She'd tell her daughter that being chosen wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real, about showing up as your full self and trusting that somewhere, someone would see your value even when the world tried to convince you it wasn't there. Standing at that cabin window with her husband's arms around her and her daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, Hannah finally understood the truth that had eluded her for so long. She wasn't chosen because she became someone different. She was chosen because someone finally saw who she'd always been, and that made all the difference.
Thank you. Truly. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. In a world full of noise and endless distractions, the simple act of listening to a story all the way through is something quietly meaningful. Somewhere out there in the dusty frontier of the Old West, life in the town of Millage likely went on just as it always had. The same dirt roads stretching between wooden buildings, the same wind sweeping across the open fields, the same people waking each morning to the rhythm of survival. But just beyond that town, there was a small cabin, and inside that cabin lived a man who once begged an entire town to help save his child. A woman the town believed was unworthy of motherhood, and a little girl who survived when almost no one believed she would. Sometimes we imagine that the world changes through grand events, through heroic acts that everyone can see. But more often, the world changes because of something very small. One person stopping, one person stepping forward, one person quietly saying, "I'll help." On that day in the market square, Evan asked everyone for help, and everyone turned away. Not because they didn't understand what was happening, not because they didn't see the baby growing weaker in his arms, but because sometimes people fear judgment more than they fear losing their compassion. Only Clara stepped forward, a woman carrying her own grief. A woman whispered about, judged, and pushed to the edges of town. A woman the community had already decided was broken, but in that moment, Clara wasn't thinking about reputation. She wasn't thinking about what people would say. She simply saw a fragile life slipping away, and she stepped forward. That single decision, quiet and uncelebrated, changed everything. Rose lived. A child who might have been forgotten by an entire town grew strong in the arms of a woman who had not given birth to her, but gave her life in every way that mattered.
And perhaps the most beautiful truth in this story is this. Sometimes the people the world calls unworthy are the very ones capable of the greatest kindness. Clara once believed her life had already been decided, that her past losses defined her, that the whispers around town were the truth about who she was. But then one day, a child needed her. And in that moment, every label the world had placed on her lost its power. Because the worth of a person is never truly measured by what others say about them. It is measured by what they choose to do when someone else needs them. This story isn't really about winning a hearing or proving the town wrong. It's about something quieter than that. It's about two people who had both been pushed to the edges of their community, finding a reason to stand together, not through grand declarations, not through perfect romance, but through respect, through trust, through a shared purpose. They didn't set out to build a perfect life. They simply built a home where Rose could grow up safe, a home where the past no longer held all the power, a home where two lonely people no longer had to face the world alone. And maybe that's what this story leaves with us tonight, that the moments that change lives are rarely dramatic. They are quiet, a hand reaching out, a voice choosing kindness, a single step forward when everyone else steps back. You may never be applauded for those moments. The world may never notice, but somewhere, someone's life might change because you chose not to turn away. And perhaps that is more powerful than any recognition. Maybe today you feel like Clara once did, carrying old wounds, old judgments, old stories about who you are. But remember this, Clara believed she was only surviving until the moment someone needed her. And in that moment, her life became something more than survival. It became purpose. Someday, somewhere in your life, there may be a moment like that. Maybe not a baby in need of saving. Maybe just a person who needs kindness. Someone who needs to be believed. Someone who needs a stranger willing to step forward. And when that moment comes, I hope you remember this quiet story from the frontier. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not to change the whole world, but simply to step out of the crowd and say, "I'll help." Thank you for listening. And before we part ways tonight, hold on to this small thought. In a world that often turns away, one heart that refuses to do so can still save a life.